The tall, gangly thing?
Hello and welcome. Today I'm joined by the only North American to have ever beaten me in a Fight Night Rising in TFT Set 2. He also happens to be the product manager for TFT Esports at Wisdom Gaming. It's NaturesBF. Natures, thanks so much for being here. How you doing?
Hey, Gangly, I'm doing great. This is the first public interview I've been on in a long time. There's been like a few people that have inquired about it, and for whatever reason, it hasn't actually happened. So I'm happy we're to make this work.
Now, for anyone who may not be super familiar with who you are, why don't you just go ahead and tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I am just a guy that back in 2019, early 2019, I was started playing Dota Auto Chess, which was the original auto battler that got popular. At least there's other ones, but got popular. And kind of kicked off the genre, and I got really good at that game. I got rank 1 in North America, and I don't know, I was in love with the game. It's most addicted I've ever been to a game, period. And then TFT came out, and it was like everyone pivoted, including myself. It just like the game was sweet. So I started playing that as a player, and then eventually transitioned into being more of a event organizer, tournament organizer, that kind of role.
Yeah, I mean, like you mentioned, tournament organizer, you're currently working with Wisdom. And one of the things that I know about you is that you've had a hand to a certain extent in developing competitive formats. Can you just kind of give me a breakdown of like when did that all start? And obviously being a top player, how did your experience in, the competitive scene feed into that?
So to answer the first part, technically set 1, which sounds really freaking weird because in set 1 there wasn't a competitive esports and TFT didn't exist. So something about myself is that I give a lot of feedback to people. It's actually, I have a lot of people within Riot that I talked to since set 1, giving feedback balance-wise, giving feedback design-wise, giving feedback esports-wise, that kind of thing. And so I was in talks to people in Riot in set 1, giving advice about competitive things because I already knew some behind-the-scenes information at that point of what their plans were. They were actually planning esports back in set 1. A lot of those things didn't end up happening, but they're like, obviously with any Riot game, it's a very competitive game. Like, yes, TFT is a competitive game. Like, they have that in the back of their mind if it takes off, right? So I was always someone that was really involved in that, and then it kind of grew over time. So like set 1 and 2 was like a lot of DMs and that kind of thing. And set 2 it started being a little bit in lobby 2. And then like set 3 and 4, I started being like meetings, talking to people about it. Like, but as just as an advisor, as a player. And then over time, that kind of picked up and grew, and then in set 5 I was actually in the major meetings for it, but still more in a minor role. And then set 6, as we head into set 7, I was one of the major lead roles in all of that. So this is like at this point where I've since about November when I was promoted is where I'm had a much larger impact.
Obviously, you're
and as a player.
Yeah, as a player, yeah, go for it.
Forgot about that part. So yeah, as a player, it impacted a lot because, well, it impacted a decent amount. Okay, so one thing that I always try to do is look at a lot of different perspectives on things. And I was able to have a player perspective on things. And that shaped a decent amount of what I had, but the reality is the player perspective on things is so vast in itself that I only have my own perspective to look at, and so I still need to talk to others and get their perspectives. Because like if I was to make the format that would have suited me best back when I was a player in like set 2, set 3, whatever, it'd be atrocious. Like I would like it, but most people wouldn't. So it had a lot of it had very little impact on like in that exact thing. But what it helps me think of is like, okay, as a player, how would this thing frustrate me? Like, how would I feel about this specific thing? And that helps. But like as an overall system, like I have to take my own experiences and my own thoughts with a much smaller part of it. Does that make sense?
No, yeah, I definitely get it. Definitely get it. And TFT's come a long way. I feel like in terms of how we've approached the competitive scene. I mean, definitely made huge strides since set 1 and 2, where really we only had grassroots things, starting in set 3, where we really had this competitive circuit. What have been, at least on your end, like some of the major learnings you've seen from the last few sets?
So That's a good question. I think that on the actual format side, I think there's a lot. Like there's parts of all sides of this. There's production, there's format, there's publishing, there's lots of different things, right? But on the like the format, like the tournament organization part, I think that one learning, right, that I think has been very big and is highlighted this set is one of the most important things is actually having fun events that are hype. Like a lot of people you talk to in a lot of esports players, and when you see, you know, like a twit long or something like that, a lot of what that's going to be focused on is about fairness of events. And the reason for that is like that's what people are going to be universally agreeing upon is like, you know, 3 game sample size isn't fair, right? And that's true. But when you really talk to a lot of players and you see where they are dissatisfied and like what they're really missing, and same thing with viewers. But I think like people don't think of this as much with players, but it's actually really, really prevalent. Is what they really care about is like hype. They want stakes. They want to be playing this and really feel like what they're doing matters. And so you'll see that in a lot, like in this set, you'll see like mid set finale having a world spot, right? You'll see there's a singular winners for all the cups. There, when you're guaranteed to move on to the next day, you're not playing in games that feel pointless because it's just for seeding that like is like it's for, you know, get bonus points. So like at all stages, you're like these things just feel more hype. There's more on the line. I really care about that I'm playing. So I think that's probably the biggest learning is like making sure that the events people are playing in, they just feel fun, they feel competitive, they feel high stakes, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I kind of want to call out the fact that one of the issues that I think a lot of people recognize with TFT is that it is a difficult game to make it feel like every game has something at stake, especially because the way you really have validated results is with a large sample size. And when you're playing with a large sample size, assuming we can ever get to a point, how do you have a large sample size where every game matters? The reality is that it's very difficult to do that. Something that you introduced in set 7, that your team introduced in set 7 that I love, is this idea of breaking down tournaments into stages that aren't, we're not doing the 3-game sample size anymore, but we're also making it that your first 6 games bleed into what your next day looks like. That idea of the bonus point, breaking it down really into a 4-stage tournament across 4 days, definitely helps in solving that problem of how we make every game count. So I want to applaud the TFT esports team on that, because I definitely think that was a big criticism of set 6, that it seems like, whether this is the ultimate resolution, this is at least a great step forward in how we approach that.
It kind of cheats sample size. Like it's the thing is that you need sample size to be small enough that the games feel hype for people. And also that players aren't burnt out. Because that's actually another point. But by making previous games matter, but by a small amount, you effectively are increasing the sample size. Even if it's not by, it's a small number of points, but those number of points that are determined are after a large amount of games. So it's a way to cheat the sample size and make it bigger without actually hurting that other element of hype. So yeah, I'm really excited for it. And I really want to see how it turns out.
That's a really interesting perspective, and I totally get it. When you're talking about just like the point differential between players, because it's 1 to 3 points, I believe, is the bonus point step, which really, that can be, there's a 7-point differential in one game, but like,
had the 1 point ever.
Yeah, oftentimes, like a lot of tournaments come down to those extra 1 or 2 or 3 points that actually would swing the tournament in the other direction. So that's a really, really interesting perspective on it. And kind of bouncing off of that, obviously, with every competitive set, TFT esports team, and I'm sure you personally, even just like speaking to people in TFT, there is so much feedback. There are a lot of opinions. I don't know if feedback is even like the right word, but there's a lot of opinions. How do you make sense of all the noise that you hear?
So let me first answer this by saying like the level of feedback that I hear, because I don't think, it's not that I don't think I know, people don't actually understand the extent of it. And this is like a personal choice that I make. The reality is, if you write something about NATFT esports in a even semi-public area, I can promise you I read it. So like this is something I don't even think my boss knows that I do this. Like I don't think I've told, maybe that's wrong. I don't think I've told anyone that I do this, but I do it because I think it helps. if you have I go to all like the different TFT discords, Teamfight Tactics Discord, the competitive TFT Discord, Mort Dog's Discord is really active. I go to all those things and I search like 20 keywords. I search format, I search tournament, I search my own name, I search Giant Slayer, I search Wisdom, I search Riot, I search the name of every single event we do. I effectively search all of these different things. So like they don't know that I read this, but like Coleman, Clear, those people in the competitive TFT discords, like I read your guys' messages. Like I know that Coleman doesn't like snapshots, right? Like I know these things. And same thing like on Reddit. Anything that's ever written on Reddit about competitive TFT, you know, on Twitter, obviously in all the private discords that I'm in, player meetings, the survey, etc. Like all these different things, like all of these things I've read. So it's there's a shitload of feedback, and it's so many different perspectives, and there's a few different ways to approach it, because people have like literally opposite opinions on things, and the really and because of that reason, you can't make everyone happy, of course. And the really weird thing is, and this is the case for some things, is that you get into the very middle. You get to the point where if you are told like this, like 15% of people said that they want this thing changed in this direction, and 15% of people said they want the same thing changed in the other direction. And what the determination you have to make is, am I in the spot where I'm making nobody happy, or am I in the spot where I'm making the largest amount of people happy? And it's a really difficult call to make, because you have to see like what percentage of people, first of all, like don't care about that thing versus like they're happy with it or that kind of thing. And the way to really get there is just by talking to people. Talk to people, that group that haven't made their thoughts known. Like really, like what do you think about it? Like propose a solution, right? If you do this thing, what's your feeling about it? If this thing was implemented, right? Um, and that's kind of and where I arrived, from all the feedback. It was consistent across all levels. Was like kind of what I mentioned earlier, is like, while what you're seeing mostly online in like more public discussions and the twitlongers and that kind of thing is stuff about fairness, and there's obviously improvements being made there. There always is. The thing that people really want was just a feeling of fun. That's what they want. They want stakes. They want fun. They want hype. And I really hope that the changes this set can capitalize on that, can help that.
Yeah, and Set 7's competitive format was just announced this past week. And at a glance, actually, it does seem pretty similar to the format from Set 6, but obviously with a few upgrades. Can you kind of speak to the process at which like this iteration of the competitive format came about?
Yeah. So there were a bunch of different stages to it. So it was like a month of analyzing all that feedback I was telling you earlier. Like effectively analyzing, you know, what these different people want, like the hundreds of people that filled out the survey that we sent out, right? Like one thing that's really interesting, I'm gonna go back to the last thing just for a second, to talk about feedback, because I think it's an interesting thing to talk about, because it is part of the process, is talking about solutions with players, and not just players, but fans and, you know, talent and that kind of thing, but just talking about solutions with people and seeing their takes on it and getting their ideas for solutions, because the reality is, 1,000 people giving you solutions is actually going to be helpful. Now, almost all of them will be unusable for some reason, and that's the problem. Is talking to players about solutions feels terrible. It has nothing to do with like, it has nothing to do with like it's bad ideas necessarily. It's that a lot of these things have been thought of and there's reasons not to. And so when you go through talking to players about solutions, like they have ideas and it's like, yeah, that fixed the problem. And then you tell them why you can't do that. And like usually it's like something they just didn't think about and like, oh yeah, you're right. But it feels really bad because it's again, like we can't do this, we can't do this, can't do this. And it's not like, it feels to them like they're just being shut down, like they don't want to take any of my solutions. And it's not that, it's like there's actually like side effects to all these different things, and it's such a complicated system. But then eventually you get these really interesting ideas, and you know, they might be like a baseline idea, and you can expand on that idea and try to make a working system that, you know, works into what you're doing. So that's kind of the first stage is analyzing all that feedback and getting the list of problems, and then from those list of problems, getting different possible solutions to those problems, right? Like how do you make every event not feel like a qualifier except for regional finals, right? Well, make mid-set finale, give a world spot, and that event suddenly, like, you can't call it like a qualifier to worlds maybe, but it's like, come on. Then you do, how do you both not restrict the player pool, but also make it fair for, not just the top 32 of ladder. Like, you want to make it a fun, like, you want to accommodate all the players. So how do you make it for that full 160 group? How do you make that fair? And it's like, well, the reality is you gotta add that day. You gotta add that day, and that extra day will make it so you don't have to restrict the player pool and make sure everyone feels, like their time is being and their effort is being respected. So it's that, and then it's making, the general format, and then analyzing that format and effectively doing simulations of that format and that kind of thing, and seeing, like, how does it really play out. Is this arrive at the results we want, and then from there it's about setting it up to be announced. So it's many months. I think February is really when, like, we're collecting feedback throughout the whole set. I think February is when we really started working on all the changes. So
Trying to think timeline wise, February is where are we in TFT at that point? We're past mid set.
It's
We're
right in the middle, right when 6.5 was announced.
Right when
Launched.
Was launched. So you already had all the feedback from set 6. So even obviously at that point, things like the Piltover and the Zon Cup with 3-game sample size, all those things had already been taken into consideration.
So yeah. At that point, like, there wasn't any surprises about player feedback. Like but there was a want still after that, and the survey happened after. The survey happened in March. There was a want after that to really see, like, what, like, we know all these things are the things to complain about. Like, what are the people that like that kind of? What are people that like the current way of things? Like, we want to find out those percentages and that kind of thing. And that there's a big deal there, right?
Now there's been a lot of discourse, just to kind of change the topic. There's been a lot of discourse, specifically on Twitter in the last couple of days, about ladder versus tournament. This has been a highly debated topic, and actually, it's going to be talked about even more on High Roll Radio Monday, the 13th, I think, at 8 p.m. Eastern. But I'm curious. Obviously, coming from a top player background, now in like the tournament organizer role, where do you fall on this spectrum of ladder and tournament? What do you think each has on, like, the bearing of player skill indication?
So I'm gonna first just answer your question. And I think people's minds about to be blown. I think ladder is the best indication of skill in TFT. But what people are discussing is the reason they're discussing is because of snapshot invites to regional finals.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't think that answer is actually that matters that much. And let me explain why. Because sorry, I want to make sure I phrase this correctly.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm pretty sure I know exactly where you're going with this, and if it is, I want to say I completely agree. But keep going.
So it has to do with if you had a tournament system that was somehow absolutely perfect, and it determined without a doubt the order of skill of players, okay, over a set. Like I'm not gonna say that is perfect, but like let's say to a lot of these people that are talking about snapshot points, that tournament system would be perfect. A lot of the people, not all of them, but a lot of the people that are complaining about snapshot points wouldn't be okay with that format existing and taking away all snapshot points. Even though if you play in those tournaments, you are representing your skill perfectly. The reality is a lot of them, they just don't want to play in tournaments, which is something to look at, right? Because we still want to make, this goal is to keep making these tournaments more fun and have higher stakes, that kind of thing. They just don't, but they prefer just to be playing ladder. And the issue is look at Worlds. one of the main complaints about Worlds was like a lot of people just don't know the players outside of their region. And if
Mhm.
you have Snapshot as one of the major things about the game, like people are going to see these players they've never heard of. Like it's not a call out to Non-Tom. Like he did exactly what he should do, but like people didn't know Non-Tom was. He's not a streamer, right? Which is fine. You shouldn't have to be like streamer as your main career. So he wasn't a streamer. So like no one really knew anything about this guy, except that he was really good at the game because obviously on ladder, obviously his ladder results. And so he goes into regionals and no one knows anything about him. And like that's just not you don't build an audience that way. You don't build interest in an esport by having stuff come from from off the broadcast on ladder in this secret area. And so that really shouldn't be your goal to have like snapshots be a major portion. All it will do is restrict the growth of the esport because it makes the actual events themselves matter less, and then you know the players less. The goal really should be that you make a tournament format where these people that do so well on ladder, they will make it anyway through tournaments. And I think Set 6, by the way, did this. I think that it's... I always ask people to name me one player in Set 6 that should have been at regionals that wasn't. And the names that come up are Kurum, KOG'MAW, Bertosaurus, and Kyun. And all four of them took a break.
Didn't play, yeah.
All four of them took a break. And there's Ramkev, but Ramkev declined it. He did make it. He just declined the invite, right? So there's no... I heard recently, like except for a few that should have been at regionals. No, I don't think it's except for a few. I think every single person that should have been at regionals was there, which I think is a big success. That's why the structure of Gizmos and Gadgets worked. It works as supposed to. The people that should make it to regionals through tournaments did. There may be some extras that made it that people didn't think should deserve to be there, but that doesn't matter as long as it matters if the player pool is huge, but it wasn't. It was 24, and so the people that the players that people really felt like should be there were there, and they were able to try in regionals. And I think that's great. And by the way, I'm gonna say this. I think that won't necessarily happen this set. I think that some changes this set. I think the big one is the third cup being 160 players instead of 32. I think there's a decent chance that like one or two people that like probably deserve to be regionals don't make it. It's sad, but like FYI, that the third cup being 160 players, it was like everyone pretty much like even the top players felt that way, that like they should be 160. Like that wasn't an uncontroversial thing, but it will make it. It will add variance, and it will let more people get through that like maybe are weaker players, but it also adds a lot more hype for those players, and that's sweet. Makes that audience like way more excited. Like that third cup for a lot of those people is going to be really hype. It's maybe not for the Goobums, right? Well, maybe not will be that hype for the Goobums, but it's going to be really hype for some of those up and comers.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I feel like even thinking about examples in Set 6, like there is a world where like these players who kind of came out of the woodwork, like like Darth Noob and JD Zelinsky, for instance, like who kind of made these strong tournament runs. Actually, there were a bunch of them. I know even when I was kind of doing my stats of player averages going into, I forget what event it was. It might have been Innovation or regionals, whatever it was. A lot of the best average tournament placings were not the players that people really expected to end up in regionals, and oftentimes it was these open bracket players who are still strong, high challenger players, but aren't necessarily the high profile players that people expect. I do want to push back a little bit though on one point you mentioned, which is that for example, Non-Tom not necessarily having like the high profile and having more tournaments does allow for more narratives. So the one point I do want to push back on is that I think that if you are going to do that, or let me ask you a question instead. Do you think that if you are going to make the tournaments and the player narratives a bit more of the focus to really build up these personalities, does the broadcast and the TFT side of it actually is the onus on them to be making content that is actually pushing out these narratives? Like, for instance, I talked about on High Roll Radio how we didn't really have a lot of pieces until even 6.5, where we did have a piece on Spicy Appies, but like we didn't really have pieces on like the uprising of the new blood, of like players like Robin Songs and Milk trying to make their return to Worlds. There are a lot of narratives that aren't necessarily being shown on broadcast or even on social. Do you think that if we're going to make tournament more important, is there more pressure to create content, whether it is from Riot, from Wisdom, or even grassroots organizers who want to make their mark? Should we be making more of an effort to get this narrative storyline content actually on broadcast? I don't even know if you're allowed to answer that. Also,
I think I can answer that. I think that there is a lot of room for improvement in highlighting players in TFT. I think that you look at a lot of esports, like League of Legends, right? And like it's insane. Like people know people across the whole globe, like that aren't just streamers, right? Like you just know these players, like they're absolute insane players and that kind of thing. I think there's a lot that can be done to improve that. I think that it's something that we are working on this set, and I think it's something that is going to be an everlasting like goal of improvement. But it will it's complicated, and I think I do think
Right.
some of it has to come from people like you that do a really good job of interviewing these people and making them known, because the reality is there's only so many Twitter posts you can make and videos you can make, and but I think that like stuff like stuff like there was for the 6.5 Challenger series of having the fantasy draft at the start of the broadcast, where we got like there was like 14 players in that event that people didn't know very much. There was 2 players that they knew Bao and Soju that everyone knew, but like the other 14 they didn't know about, and that just gave a very small opportunity, but still opportunity to talk about every single one of those players just very quickly, and people are like, oh, people think that Yippee Maokai is actually kind of cracked. That's cool, good to know. So I think that kind of thing is something that needs to be done more and is going to be done more. So
all right, yeah, happy to hear that for sure. Now, another thing I think I've been pretty vocal about over the last couple of sets. Actually, I know I've spoken to you. I was in your stream once talking to you about this. Is that I've talked a lot about lowering the barrier of entry, mainly for the sake of having a clear roadmap for an up and coming player who is really just starting to be interested in the competitive scene. And I kind of place them at like this diamond, low masters level player who wants to get into it. Having events that really do include them. We had that in set 4 with the open brackets and also the last chance qualifier. But I'm curious to know, do you think that these events actually have a place in the current competitive landscape?
yes to your question. I think it's a problem that still needs to be solved. I do think that TFT long term, let me make sure I'm being clear when I say this. This is like completely nature's talking. This isn't like wisdom nature's talking or Riot nature's talking. I told you started doing set 7 plans at the start of 6.5, right? Like I can't actually speak to this, but like I would guess, and you've even seen Mortdog talk about this on Twitch, even though he's not part of the esports scene. Like he has this thought in his mind as well. That like TFT tournaments include like a large amount of people, right? The problem to solve is doing these events in a way that doesn't feel like what happened in set 6 with the 160, which is like these 3-day game eliminations. Like people might think that it's more okay to do that when you're inviting 8,000 players, right? If you go to Diamond, you're probably being like there's like at one point there's 30,000 players in Master, but I think usually it's more like around 10. I'm saying those numbers. I could be completely off because I didn't actually check last set. But so if you allowed Diamond as well and you made it actually full open, obviously you could restrict, but if you make it actually full open, like how do you accommodate that in a way that you are respecting these people's effort and their time, and you're not just being like, congrats, you hit Diamond, you get to play 2 games. Because I don't think that is going to be a fun implementation for those people. And there's still going to be a question of like rewarding it, right? Because part of the appeal of a like a low masters player or a diamond player playing in a competitive event isn't just the reward of winning it. It's going to be like, I get to be in a lobby with Nubal,
Yep.
right?
100%.
But the question is, if they're actually to be in a lobby with Nubal or Soju, how do you make it so that the event is including those players as well? Because like, do you see them into later days? Like, how many days later is that? Because how many days does this event need to be? Like, there's just a lot of complications there, and I think that the question that was being solved in the immediate is making overall events fun and fair, and then and making sure that the correct representatives are making it to regionals, that kind of thing. And then I would love to see like a way to incorporate more and more players. And I think it's also something that it can be done around the scene. Shout outs to Aegis, right? That like are helping things in that way, because that promoting competition at all levels, like what Aegis does, like this might not be their goal, but what Aegis does is they make people want to compete more, and thus they compete more, they get better more. And now they're like, oh shit, maybe I can go qualify for Dragon Cup, right?
And on top of that, going back to the whole narrative thing we're talking about, having these smaller grassroots events actually really do help in building player narratives. Like an example I think of is Shining Star, the Italian player who I swear this guy wins a tournament every weekend. I see a Twitter post from a random grassroots event with Shining Star in the top 3 every single weekend. On top of that, he wins like the Italian Super League, and it's a really good example of how having these smaller grassroots events really does help build out player brands.
You like it's kind of funny. I bet if Fight Night's on hiatus right now, but I bet if you were playing in every grassroots event you could, and like as a top player, like you might actually make like they're not that high prize pool, but you actually might make a decent amount, because like
That's true.
if you're a top player, like if you play playing them like every day, the issue is that you also have to balance ladder with that. But like it'd be pretty funny to see someone do that. I know Appies is playing in 1 per week, which is pretty sweet. But I would love to see what happens if someone decided like I'm gonna go all out. Like I know Jose Paulo, FY Fight Night, back when Jose Paulo was playing, it was top 3 move on to the next week. Jose Paulo played in 7 weeks of Fight Night in a row, and he won 4 of them. Like,
yeah. I in set 3, I forget. Did Jose tie Gunmay's streak? Because I know.
Jose Paulo played in 10 in a row. It was 10 in a row.
Yeah, it was more than 7. I remember that. But yeah, I know. I think he did tie. Oh, he beat. Oh, Gunmay's
still has the record. I think. Okay. I could be wrong. Honestly, there was that video back in January that had all these stats, and I actually compiled those. But like, I could be wrong at this point because that's been a while. So I probably just lied to everyone. Like, go fact check me. But like around those numbers, okay.
Let's talk about some format stuff. So obviously, the main format we really compete in is this free for all format. But we've also explored a couple different tournaments with different formats, specifically the team formats, either 2v2 or 4v4. How do you feel about like these teams formats? And then follow-up question for whenever you're done with that is, are there more formats you kind of have hidden in the back of your mind that you want to still explore?
So I think that Team TFT is sweet. I think that there's a few parts of it. I think that 4v4 is actually maybe the best viewing experience so far. Mort Dog Madness, like people loved watching Mort Dog Madness for that reason. But I also I don't think you're maybe I'm wrong on this, but I don't feel like the competitive format is going to be in an unofficial mode. Double up might have potential there, and I actually think that double up, if it's done properly, and it might be now, I haven't got to play it yet and that kind of thing. But I think double up has a higher. I think most people agree this double up actually has a higher skill cap than TFT does, which is like insane because TFT skill cap is like no one's near it. But I think that the viewing experience for 4v4 is really good, and 2v2 also should be better than 1v1v1v1, etc. is. But I think that they have a place, and right now I think that there's it's kind of a lot of testing, see how things go. Twitch Rivals is coming up, and that's 2v2v2 v2. And so I'm really interested to see how that goes. But I think they're not doing double up, unfortunately. I would like to see. I mean, they're probably being safe about it, but I would like to see double up events happen. And maybe I literally mean maybe here that'll be something that we do as Giant Slayer. But it's I think that the format needs to be with an actual mode for it if it's to be like the main format, right, for esports. But I do think there's a lot of potential there, and I also think there is potential for team stuff that exists in the free for all format as well. And yes, I do have ideas for that, and I'm gonna stop there.
All right. All right. That's awesome. So I'm going to be honest. So I kind of brought something like that up in Hyrule Radio, and I didn't have an idea of what it would look like, but I know there have to be really cool formats that utilize free for all that also have a team element to it. So I'm excited to hear what you have in store. I'm not going to press anymore. Just know I'm anxious and waiting to hear what it actually is. Now, speaking of non-traditional formats, you've been pretty pivotal, or that's not the right word, but you've had a pretty big hand in bringing out some pretty interesting and unique shows and tournaments into TFT, namely First Wraith, also Giant Slayer series, back in set 5 or 5.5, whatever it was.
Yeah.
What place do you think these events have in TFT?
So just so it's people know, GSS 3 only. GSS 1 and 2 would have been has to have been Risa. Just so people, I don't want to get credit for those.
Sure.
But I think they have a huge place in competitive TFT, and I think it's for trying new things and also just fucking having fun. Like both so First Wraith is like one of my favorite things ever. Okay, I fucking love First Wraith because it highlights players in a completely different way. It's completely personality based, right? But it's just like a fun way to do TFT content. And then stuff like GSS and Mort Dog Madness are like they're experimental, right? You had the Mort Dog Madness format that like you only got points for top 4. You got 10 points, and then like first got like either 12 or 11 points. Then there was and like fifth got 0, and then there was like GSS has been a 7-day format every time, I think, but it's always been different. It's been like NA has like a week, and then EU has a week, and then they combine. We've had the 2v2 setup. We had so many different formats for that. Mort Dog Madness last month was very different than any other Mort Dog Madness. Like there's so much stuff that you can do experiment wise, and like players like doing it. Like would players doing it as a thing, like as a main format in every event? Like no, probably not. Maybe I'm not gonna say definitely not, but like probably not. But you get to try this out and be like, okay, what's the reaction? And like usually it's very positive. Like tends to be the case that the grassroots stuff will have more positive reception than like the Riot stuff, because like, well, people like it's just like it's like expectations, right? That's why. So like GSS and Mort Dog Madness were received super well, and First Wraith has been received super well, and by players and by fans alike. And they're just fun, they're cool, and they promote players. I think that they are crucial to TFT, because I don't think that TFT needs to be just watching 6 games of a tournament over and over. I don't think that that's I just don't think that that's you can do so much more with the game. There's so much to the game and so much about how the formats can do that you can just do so much more. I'll leave it at that. I'm like rambling, but
no, yeah, that's great. I mean, no, I agree. I think a lot of these events, if nothing else, they feel like a celebration of the community, which is really fun. It's really fun to be a part of. Now I want to take a step back for a second, kind of look at the things you've had your hand in, or at least the things you've seen come to fruition over the last few sets, from a macro level. Like, talk to me about what is a moment where you have felt proud about how the competitive format has played out.
So I will say the proudest has probably been last Monday, where we had the format announced and the reception was just off the wall positive. It was like within the TFT people, Wisdom and Riot, it was like very celebratory. Like very happy that people were happy, and that made me really happy, because it's no secret to some people that there were some months this year that were harder than others, and so it was very satisfying to see a lot of hard work pay off. Then another point that's just kind of more of a fun answer to this was my simulation for the amount of points it would be for people to make it to mid-set finale off qualifier points was 33.6. And to make it to mid-set finale, there was a triple tiebreaker at 33 points, and one of them made it, which is 33.6.
That's amazing.
So that was fucking cool.
That's so cool.
So that's the only that was like probably like one of the coolest. Like, what the fuck? Like, obviously there's like luck involved in that. Like it shouldn't be exactly the number, but that was just cool anyway.
Yeah. That's awesome. There's like 10 people watching this interview that really appreciate how cool that is, but that's a really, really awesome moment to celebrate, man. Congrats on that. That's awesome. But Natures, that's all the questions I did have for you. Before we go, is there anything you wanted to shout out or mention?
Yeah. So, okay, I'm gonna try to do this off the top of my head. I want to shout out the production crew behind the scenes for Wisdom TFT events, because no one really knows them unless you work with us. Like, you know some of them, but like you're only gonna know like some of these names. But I'm just gonna list them out on the top of my head. I hope I don't miss anyone.
All right, let's do it.
All right. So there is on our creative side, there is our by the way, I'm not gonna say titles because I'll get those wrong for sure. Graphic designer Sam. There's our animator Chris. There is our graphics integrator Cole. There is our video producer, Charlie. There is our video editor, Abraham. Then on production side, there is Bao, our producer, Kathy, our director, Leo, our league ops. There is Alex, our live stream manager. There is Chenzi, our graphics operator. And then there is... Oh my god, I know I'm missing someone. Oh no, I can't do it. Wait. Nick, our production manager. I almost forgot a production manager. Okay, I think that is the list. Now, granted, there's also a ton of other contractors that, like, if I try to list those, I would definitely forget them. But there's our admins, our observers, our graphics operators, our live coordinators. Like, all of these people, like, I can't describe to you how much effort they put into what they do. You see me. I do put a lot of effort in, but these people also, like, are all behind the scenes. They don't get nearly the recognition I think they deserve, and they do a fantastic job. And that's also, like, there's all these other departments, like publishing, like sales, all these other departments that, like, aren't part of the actual broadcast that also put the absolute absurd amounts of effort, and they deserve that praise. So, okay, I'm happy I don't think I missed anyone. I hope I didn't. I'm gonna get called out later, but
very nice. That is more shout outs than I think the last like 10 interviews combined. Good stuff on that. All right, Natures, again, thank you so much for joining me, and everyone watching this interview. Appreciate you all watching all the way through. For more TFT coverage, guides, and content, make sure you subscribe, and I'll catch you next time.